"So what are we supposed to do?" Samuel asked Chippery. "We're going to find one of the ancient ones and stop a very bad animal from trying to take over the lands, I think, eventually," said Chippery succinctly. Averly gawked at the flame. "How are we going to do that?" asked Averly. Chippery turned to her and smiled. "With your help, of course," said Chippery. Martin walked back up to Chippery and turned to face Averly. "Don't you ever wonder what that tattoo on your face means?" asked Martin. Averly touched her face where the tattoo had been all her life. "You know what this means?" "I've had this marking for as long as I can remember," said Averly, and she rubbed her face thoughtfully. "Know about it? I can tell you exactly what it means and how you got it," said Martin. "He's right, you can," said Chippery. "We were only here to get the introduction started," said Martin. Samsa and Tamis looked forlornly at one another. "Will you stay long enough to tell us more about you and what you know about our parents?" asked Samsa. "We can, but we have to ask that you invite us in. We've been gone a while and your siblings are starting to get worried," said Martin. It was then that they realized that there was nothing in the clearing but a square ring of fire and the animals themselves in a circle with the travelers nested within. Please do come in, Martin. And you fellow rams," Tamis stammered. The sky brightened slightly, and first the fort, and then the fence line, and finally the trees came back into view. Tamis and Samson looked over at the house uneasily. A few small raccoon faces could be seen sticking their heads out behind the curtains that had been closed at the front of the building. They looked out anxiously until they noticed Samson and Tamis and jumped a little in unison. The curtains closed briefly and the door slammed open. Lisa ran out. "Where did you go? It's been hours," asked Lisa, holding her doll in one small paw. There were tracks of tears down her cheeks, and it looked like she had been crying for some time. Tamis scowled at Martin, who only smiled benignly back at him. "We're not sure, honey, but we're back now," said Tamis. Tamis hugged Lisa close as a slew of other raccoons came out and almost tackled them both to the ground with the force of their hugs. They stayed like that for a while until the sniffling from the children quieted, and Samsa told them to go back inside and that she would be with them shortly. They did as she asked, though a few could be seen sticking their heads from underneath the curtains again. She looked back at Martin and the other rams that had lined up neatly in 2 rows behind him. "You scared them half to death," said Samsa. Martin only smiled at her. Tamis looked around at the perimeter of the fence. The purple and green flames were dying down, quietly turning back into the torches and braziers they knew. There was a faint green and blue soot left over the tips of the fence as the torches returned to normal. The fence post would have to be scrubbed to get rid of it, he thought to himself, and turned to the rams in front of him. "Where did we go?" asked Tamis. "Nowhere in particular. It's a space we created so we could talk to you in private and show you what Chippery is like before bringing her back into the real world. Safer that way," said Martin. "They're very good at making containment systems," said Chippery stiffly. "It's how they pulled me out of my realm and into yours and into that blasted tin pot," beckoning to the lantern she had come from. "Now that we've introduced ourselves, may we come around the back and chat? We've got much to talk about and only tonight to do that, and I'm getting awfully thirsty and my legs ache. We walked most of the day to get to you at the right time. Tricky thing, timing," said Martin. "Oh, sure, please come back around back and we'll be able to discuss our parents," said Samsa. "And you can tell me more about my dreams," said Barklin. "And this tattoo," said Averly, still holding her face gingerly, rubbing the tattoo gently and along its circumference with one finger. Samsa and Tamis, with the travelers in tow, led the rams around the back of the house and to the tables underneath the canopies. They arranged themselves, Samsa, Tamis, Averly, Barklin, Rhodes, Samuel, and Martin, at one table while the rams filled out the rest of the seats. Chippery's lantern was put on the table next to Martin, and she stretched out and floated over to the empty spot on the opposite side of him, sitting next to Samuel. She smiled at him and winked. "I'll go get us some drinks," said Tamis. "No need. I'll take care of it," said Martin. He chanted a few words, and a keg magically appeared to rest on each table, next to which there were glasses for each of them. He poured them each a glass of clear liquid and gave them out. The rams at the other tables did the same. Samuel tried his tentatively. "It's sweet grape cordial," said Samuel. Averly tried hers. "No, it's apricot mead," said Averly. Rose and Barklin tried theirs. "Mine tastes like peach mint tea," said Rose. "Acorn dandelion tea for me," said Barklin. They looked at Martin in amazement. "It's Clerico, a magical drink that tastes like whatever you want best at that specific moment. It can change flavors minute by minute, but it will always be something that you enjoy. Thought it might help calm your nerves a bit after the light show." Rose smiled at him. "Yes, it was pretty intense. How often do you do that with new animals you meet?" asked Rose. "Honestly, I haven't done one of those in over 80 years, said Martin. Averly gawked at him. "That makes you well over 90 to 100 years old, said Averly. "A bit older. The magic combinations I use keep you looking young for what seems indefinitely, but you still feel as old as you are. I don't get out much anymore," said Martin, smiling at her. She smiled back, impressed with his answer. So are you going to tell us what to do or what you expect of us before telling us what you know of our parents? Asked Samsa, sipping her Clerico and smiling slightly at the small fizzy bubbles tickling her nose. Well, the first thing we had to do was introduce the young travelers with their new companion, and once we saw that you weren't going to freak out on us and cause a ruckus, Markin pointed towards the group's weapons, realized we could just have a simple chat with you and get most of this cleared up and hopefully set up on the right path, said Martin. He took one of each of Samson's and Tamas's paws in his hooves and held them. We don't know much about your parents' disappearance, like we said, but if we could help you find them, we will. We did send out a search party in an attempt to look for them the night they vanished, but all that turned up were the usual scorch marks of a summoning or teleportation spell, difficult to tell which, and 2 sets of spots where their feet would have been planted. We were unsure if they were pulled somewhere or sent themselves somewhere by mistake, but it's all we found at the time, said Martin. Samsa held him and her paw shook gently. She moved the paw to her face and wiped away some tears that had started to collect at the corners of her eyes. Thank you. We finally have something new to work with after all this time, said Samsa. Tamas grabbed her paw in his and gave it a reassuring squeeze. It's the least we could do for the Amberstone couple, said Martin, looking at the young raccoons. They were doing a very good job of researching us, and I was growing fond of their discussions about us while they walked in the forest. They had many good points about what they thought we were and how something like our group would have changed over the course of time. They were right, of course. We did change. We're not some band of evil ramfolk that abduct unwary travelers anymore. Our sect never did that anyway, by the way. Now we roam the countries looking for artifacts from our past and whatever else we deem interesting, and see if we can find out more about the ancients and their powerful magical mechanisms, said Martin. What about my tattoo? Asked Averly curiously. Martin turned to her and smiled. Well, that marking means you're a Senderai, a magically scorned animal. Someone in your family's timeline did something someone didn't like, and they cursed them to receive the mark. It fell out of fashion about 600 years ago, when they realized that the spell passed the mark on to the incoming generations of the families regardless of when the insult or crime was committed, almost impossible to remove. They did become fashionable for a while about 300 years ago, but then again fell out again when those that got them learned that they were permanent and clashed with their outfits. You know fashion. Very fickle, said Martin. He held out his palm to Averly and twisted it so she could see the underside of his wrist. There, emblazoned on the woolly hair of his arm, was a marking strikingly similar to that of Averly. She gasped. You're a Senderai as well? Averly almost shouted. Martin smiled back to her and said, Yes, and I'm happy to be one. We're natural magic users. Averly looked at him. Does that mean that I'm a magic user too? Asked Averly. Martin nodded. Yes, it does, but we've got to go and find something for you to focus your feelings on so you can learn to channel your magic into useful spells and the like. You can usually tell by the size of the marking how strong of a user the animal is going to be, and judging by the fact that your tattoo takes up half of your face, you're likely going to be a very powerful mage at some point in your life with the right training, said Martin. Averly put her head in her paws and blew out a large amount of air. That's crazy. There's no way I'll ever be able to do magic like what you can do, said Averly. She pointed towards the city fence line and drinks. Maybe not yet, but once you get the hang of the basics, you'll be able to do much more than those simple parlor tricks, said Martin. Averly raised her head and looked at Martin. You really think so? Asked Averly. Oh, yes, of course. Even the most basic of Senderai can use some to most magic types. If you learn the right combination, there's very little you won't be able to do, said Martin. Berkeley interrupted them. Like the way you were able to interfere with my dreams last week, asked Sparkling. Sorry again, piped up the sheep from the other table. Martin turned to her and waggled his hoof at her and turned back to him. Well, we don't like to just spring our attention on animals just because we can. When you're dreamcasting, you're hoping you can get the target if possible. He looked at Samuel and then back to Barkland. But if it's not possible, then you go for one around them that's mentally open to the ideas we're able to present them while you're dreaming. You were the most often open mind we had available, so we went with you. Sorry if the dreams made you uneasy. It's hard to having someone in your head at times, even when you're sleeping, said Martin. Barkland folded his arms and leaned back in his chair. Yes, it is. I thought you were a group that was going to get us while we were out on our travel, but in a much more menacing way, said Barkland. Martin looked at the sheep again, smiled, and she turned away embarrassed. Turning back to Barkland, he said, No, that wasn't our intention. If the dreamscape is too intense, that's usually the mage being too heavily invested with their incantation, overdoing it a bit. It can get like that once you've been chanting for over an hour. It's a very long and intensive spell, to be honest, and we don't use it very often because it knocks the animal out that used it for a day or two afterwards while they reset their minds from having been inside someone else's head. But we did need to tell your group to expect us, and you were the one we were able to get through to. All those naps you had made it much easier to work with. Thanks for being so well rested, said Martin, and he offered another large smile to Barkland. Barkland smiled to himself. I did sleep a little too often, didn't I?" said Barklin. "But it was very helpful to us, and thanks again for that," said Martin. "So what kind of trinket do I need to get on with my magic learning abilities?" asked Averly, supremely curious of what to do next. "Well, based on your marking, you'll need a specific kind of jewel. It'll be a purple garnet set in silver and shaped like this," said Martin. He drew a small hexagon shape in the air. A blue trail of light followed behind his hoof as he did so. It rested there in the air for a moment before fading. Barklin got up and went inside the house for a moment. He returned shortly with the book with the ram's horns embossed on the front. He placed it on the table and flipped through the pages until arriving at the one he was looking for. He laid the book flat and showed it to Averly. "It'd probably be one that looks like this. I noticed it earlier today when I was reading. There were a bunch of stones cut in different shapes like that," said Barklin. He pointed to the different shapes the pages showed. "Do they focus different magic user types?" Barklin asked Martin. Martin nodded. "That's the case. They let you focus one kind of magic to start with, depending on the color of the gemstone and the type of fitting it's placed in, but after you learn the type, you can focus other kinds through them as well," said Martin. He reached into his robe and pulled out a gold chain with a ring suitable for a mouse threaded around it from around his neck. He held the ring up and showed them the fire opal that sat inside the gold band. Its iridescence played a rainbow over the stone surface, which the band reflected around the edges of the firelight. "This is my focusing trinket. I was given it decades ago by the last leader of our sect, and it has been with me ever since. It's too small for me to wear, but as long as it's near you, you'll be able to learn to focus your magic within it and learn the basic spells of that color. Since purple is a combination of red and blue magics, it'll let you do either offensive or defensive of those types, and eventually combine the two if you want, at least to start with. From there you should be able to learn whichever spells you want," said Martin. He placed the necklace with the ring back inside his robe. "It should be a good starting place for someone like you," said Martin, looking averly. "And it depends on which books you read first to determine the magic you'll use first. It doesn't mean you'll be able to use both straight away or that one would be more powerful than the other, though." Averly sat back in her chair and took a sip of her Clerico. It turned a light pink color momentarily as she brought it to her lips, and the color faded as she brought it back down to the table. "So you think I'll be able to learn magic and be able to use one of those garnets to figure out how to use all sorts of spells and incantations?" asked Averly. "Well, sure," said Martin. "You're a born magic user. It's just a matter of teaching you how to focus yourself to activate the abilities you didn't know you had access to your whole life. I'll get you started by writing down how to make Clerico from any liquid you can gain access to. It should keep your thirst quenched no matter how bad a day you're having." He rubbed his hooves together and placed them on the table. He drew a rectangle on the table, a faint yellow light tracing the shape where his hooves had been, and a piece of paper materialized with a puff of green smoke. He pulled a small pen from the left sleeve of his robe and placed it on the center of the paper. The pen slowly rolled to the upper edge of the paper, and then the pen stood up by itself, resting on its nib at an angle. Averly and the others gasped as they watched the pen start to write out the spell for the drink. Martin, seemingly taking no notice of their surprise, kept talking. "It's like a recipe, you see, but you have to learn the entire thing by heart before you can begin. Plenty of animals have hurt themselves or others by not learning their spells correctly. There are some very dangerous spells out there, and you'll need guidance from teachers, if you can find them, to learn some of the more powerful spells," said Martin. The pen had stopped moving and laid back down again, having finished its task. Martin looked at it and said, "I'm also going to write down the correspondence spell. It'll let you send messages to me, and I'll be able to do the same on this piece of paper." The pen had gotten up again and was writing out another spell, this time in a thick lime green ink, changing color from the previous blue it had been. "I'll ask you to send me a message that you've gotten the trinket, whatever it is, by learning the message spell first. It's the easiest one to learn, and the worst thing that can happen with it not working is that you'll get an erroneous message sent through, likely straight gibberish, and a little puff of white smoke will pop off from whatever it is you're writing from and let you know it didn't go through at all. It takes a while, but once you've got the hang of it, the other spells become a matter of rote memorization more than anything else," said Martin, smiling widely. The pen finished what it was writing and had laid back down again. Martin picked it up and placed it back in his sleeve. He gathered the paper and looked it over, making sure everything was there and easy to read before handing the paper over to Averly. She took a moment to scan the page. There were symbolic drawings numbered with arrows pointing in the direction that the symbols were to go, and underneath each drawing was a set of sentences describing what to say. "Do I do both of these, or does this mean I can draw it out or chant it?" Averly asked Martin. "You can do either, but I want you to practice both whenever possible. Once you get good at the drawing aspect of it, you can use your paws to draw the symbols in the air to activate the spell, like how I have been doing. It gets to be second nature after a while, and it's much faster than having to chant everything out. But you should learn to speak out your spells so that you strengthen your ability to focus that much more quickly," said Martin. She studied the communication spell and started to draw the shapes out with her finger on the paper. A small blue flicker of light followed her claw for a moment. She stopped moving her paw as her eyes widened. Did you see that? Avery asked excitedly. Rose sitting next to her agreed. Yes, yes! The light came from your claws and moved across the page, said Rose, as she patted Avery on the back. You're going to be able to do magic. Avery looked at her, grinning ear to ear. Wow, said Barklin. Who knew we had a magic user in our midst? He looked at Martin. Martin just smiled back at him unblinkingly. So where do we have to go to find her trinket? Barklin asked. Well, it just so happens that you're already headed there, replied Martin. Samuel gawked at him. You mean there's one of them in Tanzania? Asked Samuel. Avery looked at Martin unexpectedly. Well, of course. Why do you think we were so interested in the Amberstone family? They've been collecting our gear for generations and have had a collection of focusing items in their guard for years. They've been entrusted by the magic-using community to look after the items, to keep them safe from unscrupulous animals, and to research what they are and what they do for our benefit. You could even go so far as to say the family itself are friends of all good magic users. In fact, if you turn to the front page of that book you're holding, Barklin, you may find something interesting, said Martin. Barklin turned the book back to the front page. It stuck slightly to the pages around it, so he gently peeled them away. On the page was a portrait similar to the one that Samuel had drawn of the young raccoon, of a mustached raccoon in what looked to be a red velvet jacket. Underneath the portrait were the words embossed in gold ink, written by Reginald P. Amberstone III. Thomas reached for the book and looked at the portrait of the raccoon. He looks like my father, said Thomas. Closer to your great-great-great-grandfather, said Martin. He came to these woods decades ago and spoke with me and my master when I was much younger, and they wrote that book together. I think he would have wanted there to be a history of our sect in case there's anything bad ever happened to us. So our family have been friends with your group for almost 100 years, asked Samsa? Oh no, very much longer than that, said Martin. Okay, well, I'm taking a break, so I might as well do some ads. This is my first one, so bear with me. So, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. That's pretty cool. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. And all you have to do is download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Please visit anchor.fm/divergentmind to leave a message so that I may get back to you. Thank you. Have a nice day. So Anchor is asking me to ask you to support me financially. I would ask that you go to my Patreon to do that, which is patreon.com/divergentmind. It means you can either become a monthly subscriber at a different tier of $1 to $3 to $5. I'm not looking for a lot. I'm not asking for a lot. I'm not asking for anything. This is going to go to the end of my podcast. I don't like it when podcasts straight up ask you for money when I'm doing okay. Well, I'm not doing okay. I'm surviving now to the point that I can make this. I would love to be able to make improvements to this by, say, getting... So basically, I'm running off an iPad, and I would like to improve it by getting different things that would make it better. Maybe some headphones that monitor output, or a better mic, though the mic I got was from J-Wife, so I might not even use the better mic. You know what I mean? It's all about whatever I need at the time, but really it's just to get healthy again, because I'm currently over 300 pounds and I don't want to die that young. I would really like to be able to afford some vegetables so I can go back to my vegetarian diet, because being this big sucks. And I'm happy to sit in a chair all day, but I really got to walk my butt off, literally. So that's what the money would be for. It would be for healthy food, because I can't afford it. I can afford ramen and pasta and rice and beans, but I can't live on carbs, because that's how you get this big on antipsychotics. Junk food and carbs, which is just cheap and plentiful around me.
So I would like to leave my house and just lose some weight. And to do that, I would like to go to the store and buy some vegetables, please. But you don't have to do anything. I'm not asking you to. I'm not begging. I'll figure it out on my own. Much pleasure, Jay.
Hey, people, take a listen to the Divergent Mind podcast. You get both insight into living with a serious mental illness and get to listen to a lovely tale about a journey cute little animals need to take. Don't miss out, and remember, divergent minds don't need to think alike.